I woke up to the sound of chaos, not the calm morning hum of bees I'd grown to love, but the distant roar of my dogs barking and the crunch of gravel under tires. When I stepped outside, still in my flannel robe, I froze. My honey shed stood open shelves nearly bare. Dozens of golden jars, my pride, my livelihood gone, and right there at the end of my driveway was Karen. You know the type HOA president, pearl necklace sunglasses at 7 a.m., and an ego big enough to need its own zip code. She was loading my honey into her white SUV like she'd just finished shopping. When I shouted, she just waved and said, "Oh, don't worry, John, the HOA will make good use of this." Then she drove off, leaving tire marks and a burning fury behind. That's when I looked toward the forest behind my house, where I knew a few hungry black bears liked to wander, and an idea sweeter than honey began to form. Before we dive into this wild HOA drama, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life HOA chaos. If you've ever lived under an HOA, you know there's always one person who treats it like their personal kingdom. In my neighborhood, that person was Karen Mitchell. She'd been the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac ever since the previous HOA president moved out, probably from sheer exhaustion of dealing with her. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was a storm in pastel cardigans, armed with clipboards, fake smiles, and a talent for making every trivial thing sound like a federal offense. Over the years, she'd fined people for leaving their trash bins out 2 minutes late, reported teenagers for unauthorized skateboarding, and even made me repaint my barn because the shade of red didn't comply with HOA aesthetic harmony. I told her it was the same red barns had been painted for 200 years, but she said, "Well, not in my HOA. That's Karen always confusing my with ours." Now I'd dealt with her nonsense before. I'd even learned to tune her out until she crossed into my world, the one sacred place she had no business meddling with my bees. You see, I've been keeping bees for over 20 years. It started as a small hobby after I retired from teaching biology. I built a few hives at the back of my property far enough from the houses to keep everyone comfortable. I followed every rule, every zoning requirement, every line in the HOA handbook. Still, Karen found reasons to complain. "The bees make my flowers too sticky," she once said. "They're aggressive toward my cat," she said another time. This after her cat clawed one of my hives open and got what I'd call a fair lesson in natural law. But despite her endless nagging, I never imagined she'd steal. That morning when I saw her SUV pulling away loaded with my honey, my first instinct was to chase her down, call the sheriff, raise hell. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the absurdity of the situation, an HOA president stealing honey like a cartoon villain. Either way, I decided to play the long game. I walked over to the empty shelves, sticky with golden residue, and let out a long sigh. The room still smelled like warmth and summer. Each jar represented hours of work, checking frames, calming hives, extracting nectar. It wasn't just food. It was a part of my life. Karen had taken that and turned it into her latest power move. Later that afternoon, she came strutting down the street like she owned it, waving at people like she was running for mayor. She had no shame whatsoever. When she spotted me in the yard, she waved her hand and said loudly enough for the entire block to hear, "John, your honey's delightful. I just sampled it at our HOA brunch committee meeting." I stood there dumbfounded. "My honey," I called back. "The honey you stole from my shed." She tilted her head, pretending not to understand. "Oh, don't be dramatic. Technically, it's from within HOA property lines, so it's shared produce. You should be thanking me for showcasing your work to the community." Shared produce. That woman had the gall to justify theft with bureaucracy. I clenched my fists, forcing a tight smile. "Next time you feel like showcasing, try asking first." Karen gave that smug, practiced laugh of hers, the kind that makes your skin crawl. "Oh, John, don't be so territorial. The bees work for everyone." I swear if there's one phrase that could trigger instant rage in me, it's that one. The bees work for everyone. I built those hives. I maintained them. I got stung, smoked, and sweltered under the sun for those little creatures. The HOA didn't even fund so much as a single jar lid. But arguing logic with Karen was like teaching calculus to a rock. It just sits there unbothered and proud of being dense. Over the next few days, things escalated. Word spread that Karen had been sharing my honey with other HOA members, handing out jars like party favors, labeling them HOA local gold. One neighbor even showed me a picture on Facebook of Karen, posing with the jars lined up on a table, captioned, "Supporting community sustainability." I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the police. But deep down, I knew the system wouldn't work in my favor. Karen had friends in the HOA board, and the cops would roll their eyes at the idea of a honey theft. So I did what I do best, I thought. I started replaying all the times Karen had gone too far. like the time she fined me $50 for having a rustic mailbox instead of a modern neutral one, or the time she tried to ban bird feeders because they attract wildlife. Ironically, she'd be meeting some wildlife soon enough. That's when I remembered something important. Behind my property line, just beyond the woods, there was a stretch of land that backed up to the old creek. Locals called it Bear Hollow because every summer a few black bears would wander through looking for food. They never bothered anyone, they'd just knock over a trash can or two before heading back into the forest. But they loved sweet smells, especially honey. That night, as I sat on my porch sipping tea, I watched the tree line sway in the fading light. I could almost see the bears moving between the shadows, lumbering silently. It made me smile, not out of malice, but out of irony. Nature has a way of balancing things, I thought. The next morning I went out early to check the hives. The bees were busy, their hum steady, their little bodies covered in pollen. It calmed me. Bees don't waste time on drama, they just work. I wished people were more like that. As I was refilling the feeders, I noticed something. Karen's SUV parked halfway down the road, trunk open. She was carrying something more jars. My jars. I couldn't believe it. After stealing once, she came back for seconds. I stood there in disbelief, holding my smoker in one hand. Then she saw me and froze. For a split second, guilt flickered across her face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She smiled, bold as ever. "Oh, I was just taking a few more jars for the HOA gift baskets." "You don't mind, do you?" I didn't even answer. I just stared at her until she grew uncomfortable. Finally, she huffed, slammed her trunk, and drove off. That was the moment I decided it was time for a different kind of justice. In all my years, I've learned one thing: you can't argue with a person who believes they're always right. You have to let the world teach them instead. And the world in my case came with thick, fur-sharp claws and a sweet tooth. That evening, I cleaned out a few old honey buckets and left them open behind my shed. I didn't do anything illegal, just recycling what Karen had left behind. The scent drifted lazily toward the woods, carried by the evening breeze. I could already hear the distant rustle of something big moving between the trees. For the first time since she'd stolen from me, I felt peace. Not because I wanted harm to come to her, but because I knew nature had a funny way of reminding people they weren't above it. Karen believed she could control everything: the lawns, the colors, the lives of her neighbors, but she was about to learn that there are forces even she couldn't regulate with an HOA clause. And me, I just sat back with my tea, watching the fireflies drift across the yard, and whispered to myself, "Let the bears handle it." When I woke up the next morning, the sun was already rising over the ridge, painting the pines in soft gold. I'd slept surprisingly well for a man planning a revenge that involved bears. Maybe it was the satisfaction of having finally made up my mind, or maybe it was just the quiet certainty that nature was about to handle what the HOA couldn't. Either way, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, stepped out to the porch, and started plotting. Now, before you go thinking I'm some kind of wilderness vigilante, let me be clear: I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just wanted Karen to get a taste, figuratively, and maybe literally, of what happens when you take what doesn't belong to you. And since she clearly loved my honey so much, I figured I'd let her share it with a few of my biggest, hungriest neighbors from the woods. I'd lived next to that forest for more than 20 years. I knew its rhythms, its wildlife, its trails. I'd even installed motion-triggered cameras to keep an eye on my hives, and those cameras had caught all kinds of visitors: raccoons, deer, the occasional fox, and once in a while a black bear or two lumbering along the creek bed. They weren't aggressive. They just followed their noses wherever the sweet smells led them. And now, thanks to Karen, I had an idea of how to give them a new scent trail to follow. I grabbed my old notepad from the kitchen table and started sketching a map of the area. My property line ended just before a small gravel path that led toward Karen's backyard. Between us was a strip of common HOA land, some shrubs, a small walking path, and a few decorative benches that nobody used. If I set things up right, I could make a subtle line of scent that led straight from the woods across the trail and into her backyard. Nothing obvious, just a faint honey aroma that would grow stronger as it got closer to her house. But to do that, I'd need bait. I walked back into my honey shed, which still looked like a crime scene: sticky shelves, a few overturned lids, and that faint, sweet smell that used to make me proud, and now just made me angry. I found a few half-filled buckets of crystallized honey that weren't good enough to sell, but still smelled like heaven to anything with a sweet tooth. I pried them open and smiled. "This'll do," I muttered. Then came the tricky part: figuring out how to lay the trail without making it look intentional. After all, if Karen saw me out there with buckets of honey leading straight to her yard, she'd be on the HOA hotline faster than a wasp on sugar, so I waited until dusk. The air was cool, the cicadas humming, the smell of pine thick in the air. I pulled on my old boots, grabbed the buckets, and started working. With a long wooden stick, I smeared small streaks of honey along the base of the trees, the fence posts, and the edge of the path, just enough to catch a bear's attention. I poured a little extra near the wild blackberry bushes that grew close to Karen's back fence, because if there's one thing bears love more than honey, it's berries dipped in it. As I worked, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. You see, Karen had once tried to have those blackberry bushes removed because she said they were messy and unkempt. The HOA landscaping crew refused. Turns out they were technically protected as native vegetation. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the time I finished, the moon was up, and my back ached like I'd wrestled a hive full of bees. I cleaned off my hands, set the empty buckets aside, and sat on my porch again with a flashlight and binoculars. The forest looked peaceful, silent, but I knew better. Somewhere out there, the bears were waking, stretching, sniffing the air, and sure enough, an hour later I saw the first movement, a large, dark shape ambling out from the tree line. Then another smaller one following behind. A mother and her cub. They sniffed the air, noses twitching, and started following the faint golden trail I'd left behind. I watched, heart pounding, as they moved slowly but steadily toward the backyards. Now, before you worry, black bears aren't the monsters people make them out to be. They're mostly big, curious creatures with an appetite for anything sweet. I wasn't setting them up for violence. I just wanted to provide them with an opportunity. And Karen was about to provide the entertainment. The next morning, I woke up early and made sure my camera system was rolling. I had one aimed at my backyard, one at the path, and one that could catch part of Karen's property over the fence. I didn't have to wait long. Around 8 a.m., I heard the sound of laughter. Karen's laughter. Loud, fake, and painfully confident. I peeked through the hedge. She was hosting one of her infamous HOA brunches, the kind with overpriced tablecloths, fake smiles, and mimosa pitchers big enough to drown in. And right there in the middle of the table, lined up like trophies, were my honey jars. She'd even made little labels that said Karen's Honey Bliss. The nerve of that woman. As she poured honey over pancakes, the scent carried on the wind straight toward the woods. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. All I had to do now was wait. About 20 minutes later, it began. A low rustling, a distant crack of branches, and then chaos. A bear lumbered into view, drawn by the smell of sugar and honey. Karen's guests froze, eyes wide, mouths open. Someone screamed. Another bear appeared, sniffing the air, then heading straight for the brunch table. Karen shrieked. Oh my God, somebody call animal control. But her guests were already scattering like pigeons, tripping over chairs and spilling orange juice as they fled. One poor man dove behind a hedge. The bears ignored them all. They were too busy licking honey off the tablecloth. I watched from behind my fence, trying my best not to laugh. Karen grabbed a garden hose and sprayed water wildly, hitting everyone but the bears. Shoo, go away. This is private property, she screamed. That's when I lost it. I burst out laughing so hard I had to sit down. There she was, the self-appointed guardian of HOA rules, trying to reason with wild bears. The scene was pure poetry, nature, reclaiming its rights one jar of honey at a time. Eventually, the bears lost interest, wandered off toward the woods, and left behind a battlefield of overturned chairs, broken glasses, and one traumatized HOA queen. The police showed up later, but by then, the bears were long gone. The officers took one look at the mess, shrugged, and told her to call wildlife services next time. That night, I sat on my porch again, sipping my tea under the stars, feeling a sense of balance I hadn't felt in years. For once, Karen was speechless. For once, the HOA couldn't write a rule to control what had happened. And for the first time since she'd stolen from me, I felt something sweet again, sweeter than honey even. Justice. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the image of Karen flailing around her brunch table, yelling at the bears, as if they were HOA members who'd forgotten to pay their dues. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ridiculous pearl necklace bouncing while she screamed shoo-shoo like she could outvote Mother Nature herself. By dawn, the neighborhood group chat was already on fire. Someone had posted shaky phone footage of the whole incident, 3 minutes of pure chaos, that quickly spread across the local community page under the caption "Bears Crash HOA Brunch. Is this a sign?" The comments were gold. Some people laughed, others blamed poor waste management, and of course Karen jumped in to declare it was all my fault. According to her, I had recklessly provoked wildlife by keeping bees and storing honey too close to residential areas. She even tagged the HOA's safety committee and suggested an emergency meeting to address the rising animal hazard. I nearly spit out my coffee when I read that. The woman had stolen my honey, attracted bears with her theft, and somehow twisted it into my negligence. That was peak Karen always flipping the story until she became the victim. Later that afternoon, she marched right up to my porch like a sheriff in heels, clipboard in hand, and fake concern on her face. "John," she started, voice dripping with condescension, "I just came by to inform you that your bees are creating a serious public risk. The bears could have attacked someone. It's only a matter of time before they come back, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "Come back? You mean to your yard?" Her nostrils flared. "To the community," she corrected sharply. "And as HOA president, it's my responsibility to maintain safety standards. I've already filed a proposal to suspend your beekeeping privileges until further review." "Further review," I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "So, let me get this straight. You steal my honey, host a brunch, attract bears, and now I'm the problem." Her eyes narrowed, and her voice went from fake concern to venom. "Watch your tone, John." "The HOA handbook clearly states," Karen, I interrupted, smiling faintly. "The HOA handbook doesn't outrank the state wildlife code. And it sure as hell doesn't give you permission to steal." That stopped her cold for a second. Then she straightened her blazer and said, "If you're suggesting I took anything that's slander, and I can take legal action," I laughed out loud. "Go ahead. I've got cameras, remember." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in years, I saw something rare in Karen's eyes: hesitation. But just as quickly, she smothered it with that same smug arrogance and spun on her heel. "Enjoy your little bee circus while you can," she snapped. "The board will deal with you soon enough." When she stormed off, I just sat there grinning like a man who'd just watched a raccoon steal her crown. But something told me this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and I wasn't the type to give in. That evening, I decided to reinforce my plan. If the bears were going to wander this way again, and I was sure they would, I might as well encourage them to pay another polite visit to my dear neighbor. I walked out behind my shed just before dusk, carrying 2 small pails of leftover honeycomb, a handful of overripe apples, and a generous amount of Karen's borrowed lavender-scented trash bags that she always left out too early. Bears, as it turns out, adore lavender. I placed the mixture in a few strategic spots, one by the blackberry thicket near her fence, one near the trail behind her pool gate, and another along the walking path where the smell would carry. Then, just to make sure the bears didn't lose interest too quickly, I sprinkled a few drops of pure honey from my last good jar along the route like breadcrumbs. To anyone watching, I probably looked insane, an old man crouched in the dark, whispering to himself, surrounded by buckets. But I wasn't just being vindictive. No, this was educational. By 10 p.m., the forest was alive again. Through my binoculars, I saw movement: 3 bears this time. A large male, a younger female, and 1 cub. They sniffed around the first pail, grunted contentedly, and then followed the scent line straight toward Karen's yard, like they were attending a picnic. And this time, Karen wasn't having a brunch. She was having a backyard yoga session. I could see her clearly from my upstairs window. She'd set up mats, candles, and those silly bug-repellent torches that smell like lemon and false confidence. A small group of HOA ladies sat cross-legged on her patio, listening to some new age music about finding your inner peace. Oh, they were about to find something all right, just not peace. As the bears reached the edge of her fence, one of them bumped the gate. The latch wasn't locked properly. It swung open with a soft creak. The first bear wandered in, sniffing around the flower beds. The yoga instructor gasped mid-chant. Karen turned her head and froze, eyes wide. "Stay calm," the instructor whispered, her voice trembling. Karen naturally did the exact opposite. She shrieked like a fire alarm, tripped over her mat, and sent a candle flying into the bushes. The other women screamed and scattered, running for the sliding door. One even climbed onto a patio chair and refused to come down. The bears, confused but unfazed, ambled toward the patio table where Karen had set out herbal tea and lemon slices. One pawed at the teapot, another knocked over a stack of towels. Karen kept yelling, "Get out of here, this is private property," and again I couldn't help laughing out loud. There she was trying to enforce HOA jurisdiction over wild bears. The chaos lasted less than 5 minutes, but it was glorious. The bears eventually left, following the trail back toward the woods, their muzzles sticky and satisfied. Karen, meanwhile, was left clutching her yoga mat like a shield, shaking and furious. The next morning, she called another emergency HOA meeting. I didn't attend, but my friend Mark did. He told me Karen showed up with scratches on her arms, probably from tripping in the bushes, and declared the neighborhood to be in a wildlife emergency. She proposed immediate action, removing all beehives, banning outdoor composting, and installing motion alarms. When Mark raised a hand and asked if maybe the bears were just attracted by her honey jars, she snapped. This is not about honey, this is about safety. The motion didn't pass. Not even close. Even her closest allies had seen enough. But Karen wasn't done. That night she came to my fence again, voice shaking with anger. I know what you're doing, she hissed. You're trying to make me look crazy. I smiled softly. Karen, you don't need my help for that. Her face turned red as a fire truck. You're playing with fire, old man. I'll make sure the entire HOA turns against you. Then you'd better bring more honey, I said, sipping my tea. The bears will love that. She glared speechless, then stormed off into the night. As the sound of her heels faded down the street, I leaned against the fence and looked toward the woods. The moonlight glowed faintly through the trees, and for a brief moment I thought I saw one of the bears at the tree line watching. Calm, quiet, powerful. I raised my cup slightly like a toast. Good work, boys. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. But even as I drifted off, I knew one thing for sure: Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. People like her never stop until they've embarrassed themselves completely. And when she did, I'd be ready with proof, with patience, and maybe with one last jar of honey. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that humiliation doesn't humble them, it energizes them. A normal person, after being chased around her yard twice by bears, would probably take a break, maybe rethink her life choices, maybe even apologize. Not Karen. By the next morning, she was back in full command mode, clipboard in hand, hair sprayed into a helmet of defiance. The neighborhood group chat was buzzing again this time, with her latest campaign, Protect Our Community from Rogue Beekeepers. That's right. According to her, I was now a public hazard who knowingly lured wildlife into the neighborhood through reckless apiculture practices. She even attached pictures, close-ups of my beehives zoomed in from her fence line with dramatic captions like potential threat zone and illegal hive expansion. The cherry on top, she'd filed a formal complaint with the County Wildlife Control Office. I found out when Officer Daniels, a young man who looked too polite for his job, showed up at my door with a clipboard of his own. "Morning, sir," he said. "We received a report about possible wildlife attraction due to beekeeping activities." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Let me guess. Karen Mitchell." He hesitated clearly, trying not to smile. "That's the name on the report, yes." "Well," I said, gesturing toward my hives, "you're welcome to take a look. My bees are registered, legal, and inspected annually by the County Agricultural Department. Everything here's up to code." Daniels nodded as he looked around. "Honestly, sir," I figured, "we get a lot of calls from HOA folks around here." He paused, flipping his notepad closed. "Off the record sounds like someone's just got a personal problem." I chuckled. "You could say that." As he left, he turned back and said with a grin, "For what it's worth, that bear video, funniest thing I've seen in years, that warmed my heart." But the satisfaction didn't last long because Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, a bright yellow sign appeared on my lawn: Notice of HOA, violation, unsafe structures, unsanctioned wildlife attractant. I stared at it for a good minute, trying to decide whether to laugh or throw something. Then I saw her across the street, watching smugly from her porch with a glass of Chardonnay like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. I walked right over. "Karen," I said, calm but firm, "take that sign down." She smiled sweetly. "Oh, John, I'm afraid I can't. The HOA board voted to open an investigation. It's out of my hands." "Out of your hands," I repeated slowly. "Karen, you are the board." She shrugged. "Then consider it a unanimous decision." It took every ounce of restraint not to tell her what I really thought. Instead, I said, "You're playing a dangerous game." She leaned in just a little and whispered, "So are you." Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking like punctuation marks on a threat. That's when I knew this wasn't going to stop until one of us broke, and I've never been the breaking kind. So I decided to prepare for her next move. And this time, I wasn't leaving anything to chance. I spent that afternoon inspecting my trail cameras. I moved closer to the property line, angled just right to catch anyone stepping foot over it. I upgraded my motion sensors, installed a backup hard drive in my workshop, and even set up a fake decoy hive in the front yard just to see if she'd mess with it. And then I waited. 3 nights later, I didn't have to wait long. The motion alert pinged my phone at 11:47 p.m. I opened the live feed, and there she was, Karen creeping through the shrubs with a flashlight, wearing a hoodie over her pajamas. For a moment, I thought she was going to vandalize the hives. But then she crouched down beside the decoy box, opened a jar, and poured something onto it. When I zoomed in, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. It was honey, my honey, judging by the label I'd printed myself months ago. She was trying to stage evidence. I hit record and watched her scatter the sticky mess, then stepped back to take photos with her phone. She slipped on the grass, cursed, and hobbled away into the dark. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The next morning, she struck again, this time with drama. She called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse, claiming she had irrefutable proof that I'd created a wildlife hazard. I showed up early, sitting quietly in the back corner as she strutted to the podium, waving her phone like a lawyer holding the smoking gun. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what you're about to see is the danger we're all living next to." She turned the screen toward the crowd, showing a photo of the decoy hive glistening with honey. "This," she declared, "is a deliberate bear lure placed by Mr. Harris." A murmur rippled through the room. She smiled triumphantly right until I raised my hand. "Madam President," I said, "may I submit Exhibit B?" I plugged in my flash drive and played the footage on the projector. There she was, caught in 1080p high definition, pouring honey onto the hive herself, flashlight beam shaking as she muttered, "There, that should do it." The silence that followed was glorious. You could hear the air conditioner humming. Karen's face went white, then red, then white again. That's fake," she stammered. "He doctored that." I leaned back and smiled. "You're welcome to ask the HOA tech team to verify the metadata." Mark, one of the board members who'd always secretly hated her, spoke up. "Karen, did you seriously sneak into his yard in the middle of the night?" "It's not like that," she sputtered. "I was gathering evidence of what another member asked. Yourself, that did it." The room erupted in laughter. Karen slammed her clipboard down and stormed out, muttering something about corruption and biased men. After that meeting, the sign disappeared from my yard by morning, but I knew she wasn't done. That afternoon, she started a new campaign, door-to-door gossiping. She told neighbors that my bees were mutating, that the honey was contaminated, and that the bears would return any day now. I could have ignored it, but honestly, I was tired of playing defense. That night, I went out back with a small bucket of spoiled honey and a mischievous grin. The bears hadn't been around for a few days, but the scent would travel far on a still night. I didn't need them to do much, just wander by, remind her that nature doesn't respond well to arrogance. Sure enough, around 3 a.m., I woke to distant barking, then a scream that could have shattered glass. I rushed to the window. Karen's motion lights were on, and 2 bears were strolling casually through her front yard, sniffing her trash bins. One knocked over a recycling bin, another pawed at her garden gnome. She was standing on her porch in a robe, waving a broom like it was a sword. "Get out, you're trespassing," she yelled. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of bed. The irony was too rich. She'd spent years weaponizing the HOA's trespassing clause, and now she was yelling it at wild animals. The bears eventually lumbered away, leaving behind a yard that looked like a war zone, and a Karen who for once looked genuinely terrified. I sat back down on my porch with my tea and whispered, "Maybe now you'll stay out of my shed." But I knew better. People like her don't learn. They plot. And sure enough, by the next morning, a certified letter was waiting on my doorstep. Karen had filed a lawsuit. The letter sat on my kitchen table like a coiled snake. Thick cream paper, gold-embossed return address, Mitchell versus Harris. Inside, a stack of legal jargon thicker than a phone book. Karen was suing me for negligence, emotional distress, property damage, and wildlife endangerment. I almost choked on my coffee. Property damage. The only thing those bears damaged was her ego. Emotional distress. She'd been causing that for the whole neighborhood long before the bears arrived. But Karen was smart in her own twisted way. She knew the HOA board was divided, and a lawsuit, especially a dramatic one, would make her look like the hero protecting the community from the crazy old beekeeper. Fine, I thought. She wanted to play that game. Then I'd let her. Because while Karen was busy building her case in the court of public opinion, I had a much bigger court in mind, one where evidence, not ego, ruled the day. Still, I couldn't deny it stung. The gall of that woman steal my honey, attract bears, and now drag me to court for it. I sat there staring at the papers and realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was entertained. Karen had crossed from petty villain to full-blown sitcom character, and at this point I was just watching the show unfold. I called my lawyer Lisa, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with the patience of a saint and the sarcasm of a stand-up comic. She'd represented me before when Karen tried to fine me for non-regulation-sized bee boxes. When I told her about the lawsuit, she didn't even sigh this time. She just laughed. "She's suing you over bears. That's new, even for her. I told you she was creative," I said. "So what's the move?" Lisa's voice turned crisp. "We play it by the book. Collect your footage, witness statements, and any documentation about your bees being legally certified. The rest, well, let's just say karma's got a subpoena of its own. That gave me some peace of mind. But peace didn't last long in our HOA. A week later, Karen decided to celebrate her supposed victory with yet another backyard event, a community restoration brunch. According to the flyers plastered around the neighborhood, it was meant to heal tensions and rebuild trust. According to everyone who knew her, it was a publicity stunt. And because she never learns, she bragged online that she'd be serving her own special honey blend again. I read that post twice, then smiled slowly. "Oh, Karen," I murmured, "you really are asking for it." See, I wasn't planning to start another bear incident, but I also wasn't planning to stop nature from doing its thing. The night before her brunch, I walked the edge of my yard with a flashlight checking the forest trail. Sure enough, the bears had returned. The early autumn chill made them hungrier, more active. One of my cameras caught a large female and 2 cubs rummaging through fallen apples. I watched them for a while, calm and steady, and whispered, "You folks might have company tomorrow." A buffet, actually. I didn't bait them. I didn't need to. Between Karen's stolen honey and her obsession with outdoor entertaining, she'd turned her backyard into a 5-star bear cafe. The next morning the air was crisp, blue sky shining over rows of folding tables draped in white cloth. Karen was in her element again, big sunglasses, floral dress, a fake smile glued on like wallpaper. Her guests fluttered around with plates of croissants and fruit, pretending they hadn't witnessed her bear fiascos the last 2 times. From my porch I watched through binoculars, tea in hand. My bees buzzed lazily nearby, completely unaware they were at the center of an HOA war. For a moment I thought maybe nothing would happen. Maybe the universe was giving her a break. But then I saw a flash of black movement along the tree line. "Oh, not again," I muttered, though I couldn't help grinning. The first bear lumbered out of the woods, sniffing the air. The second followed. Karen was mid-toast, holding a mimosa, and declaring, "We must learn to coexist peacefully with nature," when someone screamed. "Karen, behind you." She turned and froze. The bear was 20 feet away, massive and curious nose twitching as it caught the scent of her buffet. Her eyes went wide, mimosa sloshing onto the tablecloth. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Guests screamed and scattered. One woman dropped her plate and dove under the table. Another man jumped the fence entirely. Someone shouted, "Call animal control," while another yelled, "Leave the pastries." The bear ambled closer, unfazed, and pawed at the dessert table. A second bear joined in, nosing through the platters like a connoisseur. Karen backed away slowly, then tripped over her own high heels and fell into the punch bowl. I couldn't stop laughing. It was like a nature documentary directed by a comedy writer. And then to make things even better, a third bear, smaller, maybe a cub, wandered toward her patio, sniffing around the open jars of honey she'd set out as decorations. The labels said Karen's Harvest. Nature, it seemed, appreciated the irony. The cub knocked a jar over, splattering honey across the tiles. Karen shrieked and grabbed her garden hose, spraying water wildly. The bears didn't even flinch. They were too busy licking the tiles clean. Her guests fled in cars, some honking, others recording. Within 10 minutes, the community restoration brunch had turned into the Great Bear Brunch of Fairview Oaks. I meanwhile sat on my porch sipping tea, watching the show. Eventually, wildlife control arrived again. The officers knew me by name at this point. They corralled the bears gently back toward the woods, assuring everyone the animals weren't dangerous, just opportunistic. Karen, drenched and shaking, tried to blame me right there in front of them. "This man is harboring wildlife. He's using his bees to attract them." The officer, same one as before. Daniels glanced at me, then at her, and sighed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the bears aren't coming for his bees. They're coming for your brunches." The crowd of onlookers laughed. Even one of the HOA members snorted. Karen's face turned crimson. "You'll all regret this. I'm taking this straight to court." Daniels tipped his hat. "Already heard that one, ma'am." When they finally left, I noticed Karen standing in her yard alone, drenched, mascara streaked, muttering under her breath. She looked less like a queen and more like a dethroned tyrant. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night I checked my cameras. The footage was cinematic. 3 bears brunch chaos and one furious Karen trying to spray them with a hose. I saved every second of it. I didn't plan to use it, but it felt comforting knowing karma had a replay button. A few days later, HOA life returned to its usual rhythm. People waved to me again, some even stopped by to buy honey. "Local hero," one neighbor joked. "Defender of bees, banisher of bears." Karen, however, went radio silent. Her yard remained empty, her porch lights off. She didn't host any more events. I assumed she was nursing her pride or preparing her legal revenge. And sure enough, a week later I got another notice. The lawsuit wasn't just real, it had a court date. Lisa called me, her tone amused. She's actually following through with this. Looks like it, I said. You think she's got a chance, Lisa laughed softly. John, the woman served honey at a bear buffet. If that's not self-sabotage, I don't know what is. Just bring your footage, keep calm, and let the system do its thing. I nodded, looking out toward the forest. The sun was setting, painting the horizon amber. My bees hummed gently around their hives the way they always did when the world was calm again. Karen thought she could control everything, the rules, the people, even the animals. But nature had a way of humbling arrogance one paw print at a time. And I had a feeling her next lesson was coming soon inside a courtroom under fluorescent lights where even she couldn't talk her way out. The courthouse was small, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and old wood polish. I'd been here before traffic tickets, local permits, the odd HOA appeal, but never for something quite like this. The morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching the dust motes as they drifted lazily above the benches. Karen was already there, of course, seated at the plaintiff's table in an outfit that screamed tragic heroine. She wore a neck brace, yes, a neck brace, and an oversized pair of dark sunglasses indoors, as if she were expecting paparazzi. Her lawyer, a nervous-looking man with too much gel in his hair, whispered something to her, but she shushed him dramatically. Across the room, my lawyer Lisa leaned back in her chair with the confidence of someone who'd seen this circus before. She looked at me and smirked. Don't worry, John. We're not fighting an opponent today, we're fighting a performance. Karen spotted me and gave a weak theatrical smile. Good morning, John. I do hope we can resolve this peacefully. I nodded politely. So do I. But somehow I doubt your definition of peaceful matches mine. When the judge entered a tired man in his 50s with a face that said, I've seen too many Karens this week, everyone stood. Be seated, he said, voice low and weary. He shuffled some papers, then sighed. All right, let's get this over with. Case number 22 to 481, Mitchell versus Harris. Miss Mitchell, you're claiming damages resulting from, he squinted at the file, bear-related trauma. Karen nodded solemnly, her neck brace squeaking. Yes, Your Honor. I was attacked viciously by wild bears as a result of my neighbor's reckless beekeeping and deliberate negligence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Attacked. She dabbed at imaginary tears. They invaded my property. I feared for my life. I still have nightmares. I nearly snorted. Lisa elbowed me gently. Miss Mitchell, the judge continued, you're alleging that Mr. Harris somehow caused these bears to appear. Precisely, Karen said, voice quivering like an actress mid-soliloquy. He keeps bees, and everyone knows bears are drawn to honey. He knew this. He weaponized it against me. That was it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I laughed, out loud. The courtroom turned. The judge gave me a look that said, careful, old man. Apologies, Your Honor, I said, still chuckling. It's just I didn't realize my hives were part of the Wildlife Defense Department. Lisa stood smoothly. If I may, Your Honor, the defense is prepared to demonstrate that Miss Mitchell's claims are not only unfounded but entirely self-inflicted. Karen's lawyer rose. Objection overruled, the judge said instantly. I want to see where this goes. Lisa plugged a flash drive into the courtroom's projector. The first video began to play crisp, high-definition security footage from my property line. There was Karen sneaking into my yard in the dead of night, flashlight in one hand, honey jar in the other. She poured it onto the decoy hive, muttering to herself. That should prove it. Then she slipped, cursed, and hobbled away. The courtroom went silent, except for a few muffled laughs from the back row. The judge leaned forward, rubbing his forehead. Miss Mitchell, is that you? Karen froze. That video is doctored. He's using AI or something, Lisa smirked. Would you like the metadata, Your Honor, time-stamped and verified? The judge sighed. Please continue. The next video clip began the infamous bear brunch. Karen's yard filled the screen tables lined with pastries and jars labeled Karen's Harvest. Then, right on cue, the first bear ambled in, followed by chaos, screaming guests spilled champagne, and Karen herself sprinting into a punch bowl. Laughter broke out across the courtroom. Even the bailiff cracked a grin. When the clip ended, the judge pinched the bridge of his nose. Miss Mitchell, he said slowly, you're suing this man for negligence because bears came to your brunch, which featured honey you stole from him. Karen's face was redder than a fire truck. I was promoting local goods, Lisa repeated. So you admit the honey was his, Karen faltered. I meant the community's. The judge held up a hand. Miss Mitchell, please stop. I don't have the stamina for whatever that sentence was going to be. He turned to Lisa. Counselor, does your client have any other evidence to present? Lisa smiled. Just one more clip, Your Honor. This one was from my trail camera, a wide shot of the forest edge, showing the bears sniffing along the honey trail and wandering straight into Karen's yard. Lisa narrated, "As you can see, these animals followed a scent trail originating from Miss Mitchell's property. My client's hives are over 100 feet away, sealed and legally maintained." Karen jumped to her feet. "That's impossible. He's manipulating the bears." The judge blinked. "Manipulating the bears? Yes, he has pheromones or something," she shouted. "He trains them." At that, the courtroom erupted in laughter. Someone in the back whispered, "What is he, the bear whisperer?" Even the judge chuckled. "Miss Mitchell, I think you've been watching too much Discovery Channel. Sit down." Karen sat fuming. Lisa wrapped up the defense neatly. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's property was invaded because she unlawfully removed honey from my client's shed, left it uncovered, and hosted multiple outdoor events featuring that stolen product. The resulting incidents were entirely her doing. We're countering with a motion to dismiss and reimbursement for legal fees." The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. The room went quiet. After a long pause, he said, "Miss Mitchell, do you have any evidence that contradicts what we've just seen?" Karen glanced desperately at her lawyer, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "Your Honor, my client is under emotional distress." "Distress," the judge interrupted, "does not erase video evidence. Case dismissed." He banged his gavel, stood, and muttered something that sounded like "I need a vacation." The courtroom burst into murmurs. Karen stood frozen for a second, then ripped off her neck brace and stormed out, nearly knocking over a reporter's camera. Lisa patted my arm. "Well, that went about as expected." I chuckled. "You sure we can't charge her for audience admission?" Tempting, she said, "but the satisfaction's free." As we left the courthouse, the cool afternoon breeze felt lighter than it had in months. The crowd outside wasn't large, but the local reporter who'd caught wind of the case was there, microphone ready. "Mr. Harris, how does it feel to win against your HOA president?" I grinned. "Justice is sweet," I said, "almost as sweet as my honey." That night I sat on my porch again, the sunset glowing amber over the hives. My bees were calm, busy as ever, humming that low, steady tune that always felt like home. Across the street, Karen's house was dark, curtains drawn, not a single light on. I didn't celebrate out loud. I didn't gloat. But I did allow myself one satisfied smile and a quiet toast with my teacup. For once, peace had returned to Fairview Oaks. At least I thought it had. Because the very next morning, as I was checking the hives, I saw Karen's car pull out of her driveway loaded with boxes. She wasn't alone. Movers were helping. She was leaving. She didn't look at me, not even once, just slammed the car door, barked an order at the movers, and drove off down the street. I stood there watching the dust settle behind her SUV. After all those years of noise control and chaos, the silence she left behind was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The bees buzzed softly around me, golden and free, as if the whole world had exhaled. The county courthouse was one of those small-town relics, brick walls, squeaky floors, and the faint smell of coffee that had been brewing since 1985. By the time I walked in, the place was buzzing with whispers. You could feel it, the whole neighborhood wanted a front-row seat. After all, this wasn't just any lawsuit. This was Karen versus common sense. She was already there, of course. Karen Mitchell, queen of the HOA and self-declared victim of the bear incident, sat at the plaintiff's table in a beige suit, and I kid you not, a neck brace. The woman had never met a spotlight she didn't love. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue as if she'd survived a natural disaster instead of a poorly planned brunch. Her lawyer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, shuffled papers nervously. Across from them, Lisa, my attorney, leaned back, calm and confident. "Don't worry, John," she whispered. "She's performing for an audience, not a judge." Karen spotted me and smiled that tight-lipped grin predators use when they think they've already won. "Morning, John. I do hope we can resolve this peacefully," she said, voice dripping with fake sweetness. I smiled back. "I'm sure nature will decide that soon enough." When the judge walked in, everyone rose. He was a weary man in his 50s who looked like he'd seen too many ridiculous cases. He skimmed the file, sighed, and said, "All right, Mitchell versus Harris. The plaintiff claims damages from a bear-related trauma." Karen's hand shot up like she was answering a quiz show. "Yes, Your Honor. My life was endangered because my neighbor deliberately lured dangerous wildlife into our community using his bees and honey." The judge blinked. "Dangerous wildlife bears, Your Honor. Multiple bears. They stormed my property twice, and I have suffered immeasurable stress and humiliation." She clutched her neck dramatically. Lisa's eyebrow twitched. I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. Miss Mitchell, the judge said dryly, are you claiming this man intentionally summoned bears to your yard? Yes, she said, eyes wide. He runs a wild animal operation under the guise of beekeeping. He has pheromones. The judge cut her off with a raised hand. That's enough. Let's see what the defense has to say. Lisa stood. Thank you, Your Honor. I believe the facts will speak louder than my client ever could. She plugged in a flash drive, and the projector lit up. The first clip appeared clear security footage of Karen herself, sneaking into my yard at midnight, pouring honey over one of my hives while muttering, "That should prove it." The courtroom fell silent. Then someone in the audience snorted. The judge leaned forward. Miss Mitchell, is that you? Karen turned pink. That's doctored. AI-generated. Lisa smiled faintly. We can provide metadata verification, time-stamped, certified. Continue, said the judge, rubbing his temples. Next came the bear brunch footage. There was Karen in glorious high definition running in circles while 3 bears explored her patio buffet. Honey jars labeled Karen's Harvest glistened in the sunlight. Her guests screamed, one dove into the pool, another tripped into a bush. By the time the clip ended, the bailiff was biting his lip to hide a grin. The judge sighed deeply. Miss Mitchell, you're suing because bears visited your brunch, which featured stolen honey. It wasn't stolen, she sputtered. It was community property. Lisa stepped forward. Your Honor, for clarity, that honey was produced from my client's registered hives on his private land. Miss Mitchell trespassed, removed it without consent, and repeatedly hosted events that drew wildlife. My client's only involvement was existing. The judge almost smiled. Existing, huh? A dangerous precedent indeed. Karen slammed a hand on the table. He manipulated them. He has special bear pheromones or something. At that, the entire room erupted. Someone whispered, "What is he, the bear whisperer?" Even the judge chuckled. Miss Mitchell, bears don't work on commission. Sit down. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Your Honor, my client is under extreme distress. Distress doesn't rewrite facts, the judge said flatly. You've wasted enough taxpayer time. Case dismissed. Bang. Gavel down. Karen froze, mouth open like a fish out of water. Then, in one swift motion, she ripped off her neck brace and stormed out of the courtroom, heels clacking like gunfire. Lisa packed her files, grinning. You know, John, I've won hundreds of cases, but this one's going on my wall. Mine too, I said. Maybe right above the honey shelf. Outside, a few neighbors who'd come to watch were waiting. One shouted, "Hey, bear guy, you showed her." Another patted my shoulder. Justice tastes sweet, doesn't it? I smiled. Sweeter than honey. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sun dip behind the tree line. The air smelled of pine and wildflowers. The bees hummed softly around their hives, and for the first time in months, there was real peace. Across the street, Karen's curtains stayed closed. Not a single light flickered in her house. Days passed. She didn't come out. No HOA memos, no threats, no clipboard patrols. The silence felt almost unnatural, like the woods holding its breath. Then, one morning, I saw movement. A moving truck. 2 men hauling boxes out of her house while she barked orders. Her SUV was packed to the brim, labeled boxes, houseplants, a framed HOA President of the Year plaque that probably only she had printed. She didn't look my way as she got in the car, slammed the door, and drove off. Not once. As the sound of her tires faded, I took a long sip of tea and whispered, "Goodbye, Karen." Later that day, a few neighbors gathered on the street. Mark from across the way raised his coffee mug. End of an era, end of a reign, I corrected. We laughed, and for the first time, Fairview Oaks actually felt like a community instead of a battlefield. No one policing lawn heights. No one fining kids for sidewalk chalk. Just normal people in peace. Lisa called that evening to check in. So how's retirement from the HOA war zone? Peaceful, I said. Almost too peaceful. She chuckled. Enjoy it while it lasts. Somewhere out there, Karen's already rewriting history. I'm sure she is, I said, watching the hives glow in the sunset. But that's okay. Nature keeps the best records. And as the sun slipped behind the pines, a bear lumbered briefly along the far tree line, sniffing the air before vanishing back into the woods. I raised my teacup toward it. To justice, I murmured. To sweet, sticky, poetic justice. Karen's departure was almost cinematic. The day after the court ruling, her once pristine lawn was littered with cardboard boxes, broken decor, and a for sale sign that looked like it had been hammered in with pure spite. The movers worked in silence while she paced up and down her driveway, barking instructions like a general retreating from a lost war. The neighbors pretended not to watch, but everyone peeked through curtains, After years of her bossing, people around dictating mailbox colors, policing, lawn edges, and tattling about unapproved garden ornaments, seeing her pack up felt like a national holiday. I didn't gloat, well, maybe a little. But it wasn't joy in her downfall, it was relief. The storm had finally passed. As her SUV pulled away, I raised my teacup toward her taillights. "And may your next HOA love you as much as this one did," I murmured. Then I turned back to my hives. The bees were thriving, calm, steady, disciplined. Unlike humans, they never needed a rule book to cooperate. Watching them work together always reminded me why I started this in the first place: patience, balance, and quiet purpose. That night, the neighborhood was so peaceful, it felt unnatural. No late-night emails demanding clarifications. No passive-aggressive flyers about trash bin etiquette. Even the air smelled lighter, like the whole community had exhaled. For the first time in months, I slept like a man who didn't need to check his security cameras every few hours. 2 weeks later, I noticed a sold tag on the sign outside Karen's house. Rumor was that the buyers were a young couple moving in from the city. Nice folks, apparently. Teachers. They had a dog, and according to Mark across the street, plans to turn the backyard into a vegetable garden. When moving day came, I baked them a honey loaf as a peace offering, part welcome gift, part tradition. I walked over as they were unpacking. The woman Emily smiled when she saw the bread. "Oh, you must be John. We heard you're the beekeeper." "That's me," I said, handing her the loaf. "Don't worry, the bees are friendly. Mostly," her husband laughed. "That's good. We're actually planning to start a few hives ourselves. I make beeswax candles as a hobby." I blinked. "You do what now?" he grinned. "Candles. Real old-school stuff." We figured the honey and wax would go hand in hand. I couldn't help but laugh. "Well," I said, "I think this neighborhood just found its new power couple." It was poetic, really. Karen had spent years trying to stamp out my bees, and now her old property would be home to 2 new keepers. The universe had a sense of humor, after all. Life settled into a new rhythm. With Karen gone, the HOA mellowed out. Meetings were shorter, rules got revised, and people actually smiled at each other. The board voted to rename Mitchell Park back to its original name, Cedar Grove, and there was even talk of hosting a real community picnic instead of Karen's exclusive brunches. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, Mark walked over with a beer. "You know," he said, "I almost missed the drama." I chuckled. "Give it time. Nature abhors a vacuum." He laughed. "You think someone else will step up to fill the Karen void?" "Not right away," I said, taking a sip of tea. "But the HOA always produces a few contenders. Power's like pollen, it attracts the wrong kind of buzz." He grinned. "Fair enough. But you, my friend, are a legend now. The bear whisperer of Fairview Oaks." I groaned. "Please don't start that again." "Too late," he said. "There's a meme going around on the neighborhood chat. You, the bears, and the honey jar." "Fantastic," I muttered. But secretly I didn't mind. It was nice being known for something other than the cranky old beekeeper. A few weeks after that, I walked into my backyard one morning and froze. Near the hives, the grass was pressed down the soil marked by large paw prints. My heart skipped a beat. I knew those prints. A bear had passed through again. The honey buckets were untouched, but one of my hives had a few scratch marks along the edge, as if a curious paw had tried to peek inside. The bees seemed unbothered, buzzing along their routine like nothing had happened. I looked toward the woods, half expecting to see movement. Nothing, just sunlight filtering through the trees. But somehow I smiled. "Morning, old friend," I said softly. "Just passing through, huh?" Maybe it was my imagination, but I like to think that one of those bears remembered me, or at least the strange little man who once let them handle a problem on his behalf. That evening, I poured a small jar of honey and left it by the tree line, not as bait, as gratitude. A month later, the new neighbors invited me over for dinner. Emily had made vegetable stew, and her husband David showed me his first batch of beeswax candles. The table flickered with soft golden light and smelled faintly of honey and cedar. "This one's called Peacekeeper," he said, handing me a candle. "Inspired by your story, I turned it in my hands, smiling. I didn't realize I'd become folklore." Emily laughed. "Oh, everyone knows about the honey war. You're practically neighborhood history now." I shook my head. "Just a man with bees and a lot of patience." "Patience," David said, pouring me a glass of wine in very good timing. We laughed, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely at ease in that community. The tension, the rules, the endless control, it had all evaporated like smoke after a storm. Sometimes I still think about Karen. Not with anger, but curiosity. People like her live in a constant state of war against others, against themselves, against the idea that the world won't bend to their will. They exhaust themselves trying to control what can't be controlled. Maybe someday somewhere else she'll learn what the bees taught me: cooperation, not domination, keeps things alive. A few months after she left, I received a letter postmarked from another town. It wasn't signed, but inside was a single sentence written in elegant handwriting. I hope your bees are still as stubborn as you. No return address. But I knew who it was from. I smiled, folded the note, and tucked it into my beekeeping journal. Maybe, just maybe, Karen had learned something after all. The seasons turned. Winter brought stillness, spring brought blossoms, and summer returned with the steady hum of the hives. Every morning I'd walk among them, listening to that quiet rhythm, the sound of thousands of tiny workers moving in harmony. Sometimes I'd glance toward the forest and imagine a pair of eyes watching from the shadows. Not threatening, just present. A reminder. Nature doesn't take sides, it just balances the scales. If there's one thing this whole fiasco taught me, it's that nature delivers justice far better than people do. You can argue, you can write letters, you can wave clipboards and quote bylaws, but in the end, the world has its own way of evening things out. Karen thought control was strength. She built fences, wrote rules, and tried to dominate everyone around her. But control isn't power. Respect is. The bees taught me that. You can't force them, they work with you only when you earn their trust. The bears taught me something too. Some lessons can't be learned gently. Sometimes the universe needs to roar before people start listening. To anyone dealing with their own HOA, Karen, take it from me, stay calm, stay kind, and let time and karma do the heavy lifting. Because when you stop fighting the noise, you start hearing the harmony again. So tell me, have you ever had your own Karen moment? Drop it in the comments, and let's hear how you handled it. And don't forget to subscribe, because more wild HOA tales and a few sweet victories are just around the corner.